Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today I'm going to be talking about game resolution and aspect ratio and how they relate to each other, and also how your viewport and camera settings affect them. This is something that I struggled with a lot, especially when I was first getting going on Gamemaker, and now that I've learned enough to be able to share what I've learned with you guys, I hope that ideally you will struggle with it less than I did. So I'm going to be going over what exactly this is, and also I'm going to be going over what exactly this is. I'm going to be explaining a little bit why we get situations like this, and also what exactly happens when we do this. What exactly causes these black bars, and what also affects our sprite distortion. As you can see, my sprites here are rather stretched. So this all comes down to the size of your window, and if you're going full screen, your window becomes the size of the monitor, and how that affects the aspect ratio of your game, right? So if I were to draw a box here, and I were to say this is, the actual game window that the game is playing at, and then I put a single sprite in the middle of it. Was it a single pixel in the middle of it? And then I were to double its width, right? What's going to happen is the pixel will double, so that one pixel will become 2 pixels. Right? Then if I also double its height, it will double in both directions, so that 1 pixel will now become 4 pixels. Right? And then the way this works with your camera, right? So right here in our viewport settings, we have camera properties. And your camera properties are going to be the white square that exists in the actual game. In your room editor, it will display as a white square as long as you have it ticked as visible, right? Your viewport, that's going to be what your window is, right? So right now I have my camera, and my camera's width and height set to the same as my viewport width and height. So then if I were to run this, it's going to look exactly the same. And that is because every single pixel is just a 1-for-1 ratio on both the width and the height, right? But let's say I were to make it twice as wide, but I were not to adjust the height whatsoever, you're going to see that I'm going to have a lot of stretching horizontally, right? See, all my pixels have been stretched horizontally, so that means that every single pixel has been doubled width-wise, but it is still a 1-for-1 for the height. But if I were to make my height also doubled, then when I play, I'm going to get a bigger window, so it's going to look almost like I zoomed in on the game, but it's still going to have the proper ratio for the pixels. Everything is still 1-for-1 because it's being doubled in both directions. So a single pixel has now become 4 pixels, but it's become 2 pixels wide, 2 pixels tall, and then when you blow it up, it's still going to look even, it's going to look proper, it's still going to look smooth in the way that it's supposed to look. But if I were to go full screen, as you can see, I still have my 1-for-1 ratio. I'm still looking at the game properly, right? Everything is being stretched to the proper way. And actually what's happening here is now every single pixel is now 4 pixels because my monitor is actually 4 times wider than my camera window. And it's also an evenly 4 times taller. Whereas if I were to go full screen and my monitor was not 4 times wider, then let's say it was 4 times wider but only twice as tall, right? Then I would get a lot of pixel distortion when I tried to go full screen, right? And then monitors themselves come in all kinds of aspect ratios, right? And it's like, how do you know the size of the monitor that you are going to be putting your game onto? And honestly, that's so like most monitors are going to be 16 by 9, which means that for every 16 pixels across, it's going to be 9 pixels tall, right? And that's where I get my my camera properties of 480 by 270, because I know that is a 16 by 9 window, right? So if I were to take 480 and divide it by 16, I would get the same number as if I took 270 and divided that by 9, right? It's same ratio both across and up. But then not all monitors are going to be like that, right? So there's widescreen monitors, and if you were to take this window and try to blow it up full screen into a widescreen monitor, what would actually happen is you would get black bars on the side. And I can show you exactly what happens when that happens, but to do so, I'm probably going to cause some distortion. See, here I am full screen, and I have these ugly black bars on the side, but my pixels aren't distorted. So like if I were to not have these bars here, my pixels would be distorted. So if you were to take a 16 by 9 game and you were to put it into a widescreen monitor, you're going to have these black bars on the sides of your screen, which honestly is not a big deal. So what you can also do is there's lots of AAA games do this. I know for sure that Blossom Tales 2 does this. One of the options that you can do is you can have the player be able to choose their monitor's resolution, and then you can have all of your variables set for each resolution type. And like the only time that this really makes a difference, because like the game is going to size to your monitor. So whatever your window is, when you go full screen, it's going to make that window fit that monitor. And if it doesn't fit the monitor perfectly, it's going to cause black bars on the sides, as long as your camera properties are the same ratio as the monitor. If your camera properties are not the same ratio as the monitor, it's still going to blow it up if your viewport is the same as the monitor, but you will not get, well, you will get pixel distortion. And so if I were to change my camera properties and I were to make the width only 400, and I were to run this, and I make it full screen, my pixels are now being stretched width-wise, but because my viewport is within an aspect ratio that matches my monitor, my window is filling the monitor properly, but my actual camera window inside my game does not fit the monitor, so it is stretching the sprites and stretching the pixels to make it fit. And that's why all my trees look like they've gained a bunch of weight and they've become slightly obese. So what do we do about this? Well, first thing is you're going to want to have your camera properties match your viewport properties, and you're also going to want both of them to be 16 by 9. So you're going to want your camera property to be a direct multiplication or division of your viewport properties. So if I have my viewport properties set at 960 by 540 like I currently do, to make sure that my game doesn't get stretched, I'm going to set it to half of that. And then when I run it, it's going to look the way that it's supposed to look. And that is because my camera is half of my viewport. And then when I'm going full screen, I'm making sure that everything relates to a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And this is actually a really important thing, is your viewport properties. So your width and your height, they're going to be multiplied by whatever they need to fit the monitor that they're being projected onto without being blown up too big one way or the other. So like my monitor, for example, is 1920 by 1080, right? So it multiplies by 2 perfectly. My width is 960, my height is 540. Like, what if I were to plug my computer into my TV? Or what if I were to port my game to console and then play on a TV? So TVs are still 16 by 9, but as you know, they are much bigger than 1920 by 1080. I don't even know off the top of my head what the resolution is of my 58-inch TV. Right, but like, we have to account for that, especially if you're somebody who's going to be putting your game on console. People are going to be playing it on 65-inch TVs, 58-inch TVs, 50-inch TVs, freaking 82-inch TVs. People are going to be taking your game, they're going to be blowing it up to be absolutely massive. And like I said, like, it's not a bad thing as long as your viewport is able to divide perfectly into that amount. Otherwise, if your camera and your viewport don't divide perfectly into the resolution, you're going to get stretching or you're going to get bars on the side. Personally, I think that bars on the side or on the top is much more preferable than stretching your sprites. I would much rather deal with a border on my game window than deal with a distorted image. A distorted image is honestly enough to make somebody stop playing your game, and that's the last thing we want. Like, we make these games for people to play them. We want people to enjoy them. You don't want people to take one look at it and have it all be stretched and be like, oh, screw this game, like, I don't want to play it. As a game developer, that's the last thing that we want. We take all of this work and all of this effort and we create what we consider to be a lot of the time a masterpiece. Like, we make the games that it is that we wish that we had to play. The only thing that sucks is we never actually get to play them because we made them, and by the time that we're done, that's a whole other thing. Okay, but anyways, this is a good example of why you actually want to keep your camera window and your viewport as small as possible. Like, if you are blowing a game up to be full screen, at least. Like, if you're going to have your game be windowed, you can do whatever the heck you want with it. You can have your viewport be freaking 1920 by 1080, and you can have it fill my entire monitor as a window, and then it'll only fill a portion of a monitor for anything that is bigger, and it'll only fill a chunk of a TV if somebody connects their computer to the TV. Right, but if you're going full screen, which honestly most games do, you're much better off to keep your camera properties and your viewport properties on the smaller side. So if you keep your viewport small, let's say as small as possible. Like, I were to have my viewport 480 by 270 is actually a great number, because the smaller the number that you are multiplying, the more likely it's going to be able to fit into more monitors. Like, if I were to have my viewport be 1920 by 1080, that is technically absolutely fine. That's going to work with my monitor. But then if somebody has a monitor that's 1.5 times the size of my monitor, it's not going to go full screen into their monitor properly. Whereas if somebody had a monitor that's exactly 2 times the size of my monitor, it is going to expand into it absolutely perfectly. Because it will just double in width and then double in height. Right? But then, if you were to have your viewport property, your actual viewport, be as small as possible, even if I have to multiply my viewport by 6 to reach the size that I need for my monitor, that is fine. And then I need to multiply it by 20 to have it fit a TV. Again, absolutely fine. You're not going to get any kind of pixel distortion. You're not going to get black bars. You're not going to get freaking any stretching or any kind of that kind of stuff. It's still going to look fine as long as it matches with your camera. The biggest thing that this actually affects is your draw GUI event. So we all use the draw GUI event. And actually, you go ahead, take your project and do it right now. Go into your draw GUI event and draw a sprite. And then use coordinates to do it, right? So tell it to draw a sprite at 2020, and then open your game as a window, and then full screen it. That sprite's still going to be in the same position, but it's going to look much smaller when you go full screen. And that is because you are drawing that size of sprite to the GUI layer, and then the GUI layer is taking up, let's say it's a 4x4 sprite, taking up 4 pixels one way, 4 pixels the other way, and then when you blow it up, it's not actually expanding it's not stretching the GUI layer, it is creating a larger GUI layer. So when you're using your draw GUI event, if you're going to be supporting multiple types of aspect ratios or resolutions, you need to have a variable your sizes, right? So let's say I were to draw a text box in the bottom of my screen, and on my monitor it fills up the entire screen. Works great. But then I were to play it on a monitor twice the size, it's going that text box is going to start at the beginning in the middle of my screen, but it's only going to fill half of the screen. It's not going to go all the way to the end like it does in my monitor, because I hard-coded the size of that text box into the game. So what you need to do to save yourself from that, if that is something that you don't want, that you might think that's fine. And if you think that's fine, awesome. Power to you. I hope your game is running great. But for me, like that would bug the heck out of me, not just as a developer, but also as a gamer. If I was playing a game, and let's say I was playing an old Zelda game, and the text box on my smaller TV filled the screen, and then it only filled a portion of the screen when I upgraded to a bigger TV, that would significantly annoy me. And then also, people with bigger screens are usually sitting farther away. So if I set my font size to be perfect for when I'm sitting in front of my computer, and then I go and blow my game up to 58-inch TV, and I sit on the couch across my living room, that text is still going to be the same size as if it was on my monitor, and it's going to look really small, and it's going to be hard to read. Right? And these are where variables come in. It's like, okay, so now that we have, variables dictating the sizes of things, how do we know what the value of those variables to be is? Right? And then also, do we take automatic control of those things, or do we have the player choose their resolution and tell the game how big their screen is, so that we can adjust our health bar and our text boxes and our user interface for equipment and stuff like that, right? So there's a couple functions the Gamemaker has built in that will tell you how big your display is, and that is display get width and display get height. And then if you use these, it will actually tell you how big your GUI layer is. And your GUI layer is always going to be the size of the window or the size of the monitor in which your game is being projected onto. So you could, during initialization of your game, you could use display get width and display get height, and you could compare the two to figure out exactly what your aspect ratio, what your resolution is going to be. And then you could have you could run a script that would then take that resolution, and it will run through all of your GUI variables, and you can have them change depending on what the resolution of the window that it's on. That is absolutely a fine way to do it. It would take a bit of programming, and you would probably have to have a loading screen or something to let the game sort through all of that stuff, and to build all of those GUI variables, and to set everything, and to scan through all of your different options for different resolutions. You could also go into the settings, and you could just make a setting for it, and the player could then go to settings, go to graphical settings, and they could choose what their resolution is, and then that would then just immediately set all of your variables, and that would work just fine. Okay, when I'm saying variables, I mean you're doing a 9 slice, and you're drawing a text box from this coordinate to that coordinate. Right? Those coordinates are going to change, and usually when I do it, I'll do room width divided by 2 plus 200 to room width divided by 2 plus 200, so that way I know that I'm getting a box that's 400 pixels wide, right? And then no matter what size your monitor is, that window is always going to be 400 pixels wide. On certain monitors, that's going to be huge. On other monitors, that's going to be absolutely tiny. But then if I were to have it be okay, so if my aspect ratio is going to be 960 by 540, have it be 200 pixels. But if it's going to be 1920 by 1080, have it be 800. Right? That way I know that my text box is now going to be 1600 pixels wide, which will almost fill a 1920 wide monitor. I'm going to need to now probably double or even triple my font size to make sure that my text is still legible. So, but yeah, all I'm saying is to make sure that your camera and your viewport have a healthy relationship where they are either double or triple or quadruple in both axes evenly, both in height and width. And then also to make sure that both of those are a 16 by 9 ratio. The only time that would be different is if instead somebody was playing on a widescreen monitor, and that player might complain. But even if they do complain, first of all, congratulations on having a fairly successful game that somebody wants to play. Second of all, maybe if that becomes an issue, you can then worry about implementing widescreen support. But for the most part, 99% of people are going to be playing on a 16 by 9, but it's probably going to be bigger than what you actually want for a chunk of your level for them to see all at one time. So you want to make sure that your camera properties is going to be able to multiply perfectly with its viewport into whatever the window is. Because when your game first fires up, the first thing it does is it's going to multiply your camera into your viewport, and then it's going to kind of bundle them together, and then it's going to multiply your viewport into the resolution when you go full screen. So just make sure that your viewport and your camera have a healthy relationship with their aspect ratios and their resolution, and then also try to keep your viewport window on the smaller side so that when it gets blown up to bigger monitors, you are able to have it blow up properly without distortion or black bars. You won't get black bars as long as you keep to the 16 by 9, and you won't get pixel distortion as long as your camera matches your viewport. And then if you are worried about your GUI elements, like your equipment and your health bar, your currency count, text boxes, stuff like that, you're going to have to figure out a system, whether it be display get width and display get height, or whether it's going to be having the player choose their resolution. A lot of games kind of do both, where they will use the built-in display detections to get the actual resolution, and then they will set it. But then if you go to settings, you can then alter it. That's what I would personally recommend doing. But yeah, you're gonna, if you care about the size and the layout of your GUI elements, you are going to need to figure out a way to have their size be set with variables, which is not hard to do. Just set the variables, and then depending on the resolution, change the variables. But you also have to figure out exactly what it is that you need those variables to be based on each resolution. And then don't go too crazy with this. Figure out 5 resolutions. 19 by 20 by 1080 is a very common monitor resolution. There are plenty of resolutions. If you want good examples of what kind of resolutions you should be accommodating, you can look at pretty much any major game. You can go into the settings, go into the graphical settings, and you can look at the resolutions that they support. But you also need to look at the kind of platform you're looking at releasing your game on, right? If you're planning on releasing your game on, let's say the Nintendo Switch, you need to make sure, 100%, the actual Switch screen, both the all of them, the light, the standard, and the OLED, are supported resolutions. Right, but then if you are porting the console, you also need to look at the graphical settings of major console release games, because they will show you the type of resolutions that they plan their games for. That's all that I have for today. I'm not really going to label this as a tutorial. I'll probably put it in my tutorial playlist, but my goal of this video wasn't to provide a tutorial, it was just to provide some information. And like I said, I struggled a lot with cameras versus viewports versus resolution versus aspect ratio. Because when I say versus, it really is versus. They're either going to be fighting each other, or they're going to work in perfect harmony. And it is our job as game developers to make sure that they are working properly so that the player can have a pleasant visual experience while playing our games. But yeah, that should be all that I have on this topic. I'm going to thank you very much for tuning in. And if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you can go ahead and comment them down below. Like I said, I'm an amateur game developer, so I am not a professional or an expert, but if you ask a question and I do know the answer to it, I will absolutely do my best to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I can try to figure it out so that hopefully we can both learn, because I spend not a lot anymore. I used to spend a lot of time watching YouTube tutorials, but I don't really nearly as much. But I am constantly learning about game development and trying to learn how to be and to become a better game developer so that I can start to make the projects that it is that I want to make. So yeah, with that, I'm going to wish you all a good one. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Peace out.